All right, so revolutionizing software testing AI. Before we going to dive in depth into that topic, I think we need another minute or so to stand still a little bit about the DNA of Brightest. So what makes us different as a software consultancy company is that we do not only offer QA professionals as consultants to our clients, but we also have what we call an internal R&D workforce. So this basically means that we have a team of dedicated people who are actually working on multiple domains to technologically advance our own consultancy services. In other words, we try to use technology to make the life of our people, meaning our consultants, easier and to make sure that we can offer more value to our customers by applying technology within the context of good testing processes and having good consultants on the floor, right? And one of those technological innovations is one that you will be seeing today, which is BrightSQAI, basically an AI testing platform that we created to increase the productivity of not only our own software testers, but also the software testers we encounter in the market or at the client. It doesn't have to be our own consultants. We've built a tool for software testers by software testers that basically means software testers that are employed by any company. Yeah, you want to reunite everybody in software testing and show them what the value of AI actually is. And that idea actually didn't come out of thin air because when we took a look at our consultants and we asked them just upfront, we noticed that on average, a professional software tester is still spending around 50 to 70% of their time on manual and repetitive tasks, despite the fact that they already have implemented a lot of test automation. Yeah, they still have test analysis to do, design, maintenance, the actual test execution. Often they are involved in test data management, test environment management. Once the automated scripts are there, those of course need to be maintained. You need to connect those to CI/CD. You need to be busy with reporting. That's still a lot of manual work in the year 2024. So yeah, and that's not really a problem, but it's a real setback when you enter the context of the peak performance that we need to get, right? Um, Company agility has made it so that peaks in QA make it more difficult for organizations to still conduct thorough testing, especially for multiple high-quality codes with a constrained time frame and a limited capacity of testers. Yeah. And that's something we see a lot, for example, in bigger ERP migrations where there are multiple waves of testing work to be done in a short period of time. Really need to make sure that you have the right focus to make that succeed. And often the testers that are on the job, they are understaffed and don't have the capacity in time to perform all the testing work that is there. So we got to thinking, and when we saw AI coming up in our industry, we were thinking about the fact that, like, okay, we need to tackle this. How can we reduce that 50 to 70% of manual work by using AI in these constrained timeframes and limited capacity projects? Yeah? So what we actually wanted to do is use AI to unlock a form of hyper automation in the software delivery lifecycle as we know it, so that we can maximize the QA coverage and reclaim the valuable time of our own people. Okay. So, in essence, we set out to build an AI platform, and that's what we so we actually built a multi-model AI engine that has been specifically trained for software testing. And when we mean multi-model, that means that we didn't invent the language models ourselves, but we consume very high-end language model from major AI providers in the market, which we go and then repurpose and do our knowledge embedding to make it so that it is completely trained for software testing in complex contexts. Yeah. So that also means that when we implement this AI platform at the client side, that they either can use all of the multi-model AI engine power that we have in our arsenal, or that they can select just one of the three, like for example, OpenAI, Anthropic, or Cohere, for their business. Yeah. So we've built our AI platform on top of those. That's why it's so complex, but at the same time, it can handle very, very complex tasks as well. It can analyze requirements, for example. It can generate contextualized test cases based on those requirements. It can prepare test data for you, and eventually, it can also automate your tests, right? And we took that whole spider web that you see on the right, and we actually condensed that into two very peculiar services. So on the one hand, we have a conversational AI testing assistant, yeah, which resembles a little bit the sphere of ChatGPT, but with some nice enhanced features specifically for software testers. And on the other hand, we have what we call the virtual test engineers, which basically can do testing work, manual testing work, can do that autonomously without the need for your own human interaction. Yeah. Um, so yeah, maybe let's dive into a demo so you can see what we're talking about. So the demo that we're about to show you is how our chat interface of our AI platform, BrightSQAI, interfaces with a test management tool called 𝘚𝘌𝘚𝘚𝘐𝘚 and will generate test data straight out of the chat to our Postgres database, right? So let me go ahead and show that to you. Let me open this up just for a second. Okay, so say if I'm a software tester and I work at 𝘚𝘌𝘚𝘐𝘚, yeah, which is a web shop that sells pickled gherkins, okay? So that I could use the BrightSQAI Chat as my assistant to make my testing work a little bit easier, yeah? So you see, I open the chat and I immediately am greeted by 𝗕𝗏, who's a virtual test engineer that lives in the chat and can be trained to my environment, right? So if you already have some very important documentation of your company, we can add it to the chat beforehand so that you're not only talking to our AI platform, but that you're also talking to your own documentation, which is really great to onboard new software testers, for example. Yeah. But in this case, I'm going to interact with it just from scratch so you can see what it is about. Yeah. So I can take some information from the company where I work, for example. I'm just going to copy this. Yeah. And then I can just explain to 𝗕𝗏 who I am. So I can say, hi 𝗕𝗏. Oh, hi 𝗕𝗏. My name is, I'm a senior test engineer, brightest. As a consultant, I'm now working for her. The company sells pickled gherkins via Shopify, for example. And then I can also add the context that I have from the gherkin website and say store context before we continue. So there we go. Yeah. So 𝗕𝗏 is now processing what I said. It's responding to me saying, okay, nice to meet you. And then she actually confirms that she has understood my context and she basically summarizes it back to me so I can then either confirm or deny whether this context is correct. So you already immediately see something here in the answer. So you have the answer, that is very obvious. But then here you have these two interesting buttons saying generate test data or generate tests. Yeah. And this is what makes it already different with ChatGPT is that I can interact with BrightSQAI as much as I want, but at any given point in time, I can give the command to either generate tests in my test management tool, which is 𝘚𝘌𝘚𝘚𝘐𝘚 in this case, yeah, or I can ask to push on test data to my database so that as a tester, I always have the correct test data. And it pushes that test data by basically reading out your data schema because it's connected to my Postgres database, and it will generate a test in 𝘚𝘌𝘚𝘚𝘐𝘚 because we got it connected with 𝘚𝘚𝘌𝘚𝘚𝘚 as well. Yeah. So let me work towards an example with you, right? So this is a web shop. Okay, it has pickled gherkins, which it sells. So let's say, okay, that we want to make sure that we have tests revolving shopping cart, right? And we can interact with 𝗕𝗏 again and say, okay, can you write some very much test shopping functionality for our Shopify web shop? And you might think like, okay, this is not a lot of context you're giving the system, and that is exactly right. This is not a lot of context, but please do note that we pre-trained BrightSQAI on some software packages that we encounter a lot. So that means that we have pre-trained it, for example, for some most used ERP systems like SAP or HANA, public cloud version, Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance and Operation or Business Central. In the CRM space, we did Salesforce, we pre-trained HubSpot. In the e-commerce space, we pre-trained Magento, we pre-trained SubCommerce, we pre-trained Shopify. So it already has a lot of context about those systems, yeah, because we work together with those companies as a partner so that we always have the latest version of their user documentation. So if you're implementing some pre-packaged software that integrates tightly with your business, then it doesn't really need a lot of context other than how your business works for the system to actually put out great test cases. So let's go ahead and work this, yeah. So we're asking Maeve for the test cases, and Maeve is basically giving me test cases, including the test steps and some inspected result, right? And you know, this isn't that fancy, and this isn't very much in detail, but we can get it into detail because we are going to use this answer actually as a baseline for BrightSQAI to generate test cases in my test monitor instance. Yeah. So for example, just let me maximize the screen while Maeve is still answering me. I'm gonna go my test monitor. There we go. Test Monitor, by the way, is a really awesome test management tool, something we use a lot at our clients just because it's so, yeah, it's really user friendly. For example, if you see the test cases in there, have an estimated duration, you have instructions, preconditions, expected results, test data section, you can add attachment text, basically everything you need. You can link requirements, risks, or applications that you stored. So really user-friendly test management tool. So let me go to the test suite that I made specifically for this demo. So when I get back to the chat here, I always have the input from BrightSQAI. And if I'm a tester and I'm like, okay, I'm very happy with this outline of those test cases, I now want you to spend more detailed time and processing power into making these test cases, I can basically say, okay, let's generate me my tests, right? So, and now I push the button and it confirmed that the generation of tests has started. And what you're about to see now is BrightSQAI, which will be processing this in the background and will eventually push out test cases just straight into Test Monitor, right? So while we're waiting for that to happen, let me go to our database that we have. Let me go. So we have a database for the 𝘚𝘌𝘚𝘐 web shop as well, where there is a table that has some customer data, right? See here, this is some synthesized customer data that's already in there. We have 5 records in there. That's something that is always kind of a hiccup for a tester, right? So you get somewhere, you have a test environment. Often more than not, the test environment is empty, and the data that you you often need a production snapshot of that, which takes a very long time to transfer, and you're basically just waiting. The good thing is that we can synthesize this test data and generate it using AI as well, using the BrightSQAI platform, which is now actually doing the heavy lifting for us in making the test cases. So if we go back to here, we have this outline of these test cases, yeah, which I used as a software testing assistant. I then asked to generate my tests via the generate tests button, and now eventually test monitor, those tests will be appearing. As you see, it used that outline and created 11 in-depth tests for this. Yeah, and you see that it really has thought about a lot. So let's see what we have here. So we basically asked, can you test me the shopping cart functionality, right? And because it's pre-trained for Shopify, it knows how Shopify works and what the options are for Shopify for everybody's web shop actually that you're to configure. So let's see what we have here. We check the cart item removal decreases the item count. Yeah, it's a very specific check. And then we see gives us an estimated duration time, gives detailed instructions. So log into user account, add any product to cart, view the cart, see the item count, click the remove button, and actually the item count should be decreased by 1. Yeah. You see the preconditions. So that means that there have to be products in a website, for example, you need to have a valid user account, and the shopping cart must be empty to begin the test. You see the expected result, and then it gives you the type of test data you need. So you need a user account with details to log in, a product to add to the cart, yeah, the remove button to be present, all of that. So it really thinks about it in detail, yeah. And you see actually from this little piece of outline, it actually created more than 10 very qualitative test cases, yeah. If I were to write them out by hand, I would have spent quite the amount of time, first of all, making a decision table to create all those test cases. Once I had them, I need to type them out by hand. I either do that in Excel or directly into Test Monitor. Otherwise, I need to upload them in Test Monitor. So that's a lot. When you get to think about it, AI just did a lot of the heavy lifting for us, right? So it made it so that we have fully fledged test cases that are ready to execute here in Test Monitor just in a matter of seconds or minutes, basically. And that can become even better because I cannot test this with a valid user, so I need to generate test data. And that's also something I can easily do because I hooked up our AI platform to our Postgres database that you can find here. See, this one had 5 records. And I can just ask BrightSQAI now to, okay, generate me a user for this, right? See, gives me a confirmation, generate the test data, okay. And now it goes to work for us and do basically just that. But this is only just the chat interface, right? So it has been pre-configured to work with Test Monitor and Postgres as a database. It already has the Shopify context, which is very nice, yeah. And you can basically use this as your own virtual testing assistant, where you can ask questions. Yeah? You can even ask it to generate code, for example. If you're using, for example, Selenium and Java, I can ask it to generate the code for Java. This, and then it will eventually just generate the code, yeah, because it has those code capabilities, learning models behind, yeah. So is basically generating the code. This is of course some pseudocode because I didn't point it directly to my code base, but if I connect it to my code base of tests, then it actually uses that code base as an input to see how I would write code and it would mimic my behavior. But more about that later, yeah, because I'm going to show you a scenario in which BrightSQAI will generate the code and that I can basically immediately run it, right? So whilst BrightSQAI is working on this, we go back database. I'm going to finish that. Customers, and we see instead of 5 rows, we now have a 6th row. So it generated me an additional user in my Shopify database. Yeah. So out of thin air, it created a synthetic person for me to use as a tester, and it also did that in a minute or so. Yeah. So I have Emily Johnson, which has an email address, which has a phone number, has a password hash, an address, and everything that's attached on that just in minutes. So that's really great. Yeah. Coming back maybe to the demo, when we go and have a look at what's possible now with virtual test engineers, that's a whole different deal, right? So the interactions you do with chat, yeah, which you saw here, I don't really have to do that if I don't want to. So the chat is a nice feature and it can be very helpful for testers to use on a day-to-day basis to optimize their testing, get some inspiration, get a little bit of help in using the fast buttons to generate test data, tests, or even automation code, whatever you need. But I still have to interact with it. So if I'm a very lazy tester and I don't want to type at all, we have something that is called virtual test engineers. Yeah. So the demo that you're about to see about those virtual test engineers is a setup where we have a virtual test engineer that works in between DevOps as a product management tool. Yeah, Azure DevOps, where the work items and user stories are for my project, that uses Test Monitor to basically manage the test cases. And then we use Catalan Studio to automate those tests. Okay. And just for start off, what is a virtual test engineer? Well, a virtual test engineer is something that you see. Basically, the virtual test engineer takes the typing work, like interacting with the chat, for example, out of your hands and does it for you based on some triggers that we can configure. Okay, so in this example, this means that when a work item is updated in Azure DevOps, we're going to then strip all the formatting for BrightSQAI because Azure DevOps stores a lot in HTML format. Yeah. Then we're going to analyze the requirements and identify test cases. And then for every test case that it identifies, that our AI system identifies, it will go through a loop where it makes test steps, preconditions, suggested test data, set the expected results for the test case, for example, push it to the test management tool with this test monitor, and then generate the code for Catalan Studio to automate our tests, right? So this is what we call a virtual test engineer, which is basically a pre-programmed AI robot that is going to work through all of these steps for you every time a work item in your Azure DevOps is updated. But the trigger can basically anything. Yeah, the trigger can be a button in the chat, like you just saw. The trigger can be a new user story that's added to Jira. If you're using Jira, the trigger can be a pull request in your Git repository. The trigger can basically be anything and use the information that's available trigger. Now, let me put it into context and actually demo that for you, right? So let me open up tabs here. Okay, so here we go. So I have my Azure DevOps here, right? And if you're working with Azure DevOps, this environment is pretty familiar, right? So let me go and work on CRM application, right? So what do I have here? This is basically a user story that describes how a CRM system should work, right? Say it's ready for development. In the real world, you would ask your tester to read through all of that information, identify the right test cases, write them out, store them in your test management tool, execute them manually, and then preferably automate. But of course, the manual work of analyzing the story, actually writing out all the test cases takes up a lot of time. And if you're near the end of the sprint, the issue is that you don't have that time. So you kind of skip writing out the detailed test cases, and that becomes a problem when you need to have structured test cases for regression once your product starts growing. So to reclaim that valuable time, we have programmed a virtual test engineer that if there are changes here in Azure DevOps, that it basically triggers a virtual process that is going to inject this in our AI system in BrightSQAI, analyze the requirement completely, and then generate all test cases, including the automated tests I need to test this, right? So let me just trigger a change here, save that. So when now I'm going back to my virtual test engineer, then I will see that in a bit, this will be triggered by Azure DevOps. There we go. So it's now playing, right? And you see that it still has one action. Keep refreshing this, you'll soon see that it will make the first queue. So that's basically now it's analyzing the information. It will determine how many test cases that requirement would need to test, and then it will spawn a few jobs, meaning one job for each test case to actually work through this entire flow, right? So as you can see, here are the jobs. These are all test cases which are playing out now. So if I'm going back to my test monitor, for example, you already know that we used check cart item stuff for Shopify that were about 11 test cases. Yeah, there are some test cases added to the cart, which is not a problem already. So it was still generating tests for the Shopify store, which is perfectly fine. Just let me delete those for clarity. So if I'm going to read now, then you see that the tests that it is putting out now are all related to the story of lead management in a CRM application, right? check all editable fields in the lead, validate lead list view display, confirm that the filtering works in the lead list, validate the delete option for the lead. And here again, have estimated execution time, have the instructions, you have preconditions, you have the expected result, and you have the test data, right? And I could spawn other stories as well now, yeah? Good thing to know is that while it is actually making these test cases, which I'm not writing, I'm reclaiming my valuable time. I only have to validate these test cases before I can execute them, but it's actually also pushing automated scripts for my test automation tool. Like they are, check all fields are editable in the lead. We have that test case, yeah? Check all fields are editable in the, we have an automated test right here, yeah? So this is a test specifically for Catalan Studio. This is a test script, guys. Let me just open that up. Studio Code, for example. This is a real test script. The only thing that I have to do is actually fill this out with my own parameters, yeah? And since I can also generate test data in my Postgres database, I can have BrightSQAI fill in the correct parameters for me so that I can immediately use it for running the tests, right? So I have this automated script now, which I can just import in my my testing tool, so that I can then automatically run it. Yeah. The only thing that might be an issue is that the page objects which we interact with might not match my own automation code base. But once I've set them correctly once, and once I mapped it out to BrightSQAI as an AI engine, it will work just straight out of the box. And I can show you an example there of where I know that it is mapped. So let me see what we have in here for the scripts that it has generated. Okay, maybe some of the working scripts. So let me download this one. Yeah, just completely if I can. That if I open my Catalan Studio example, I have this automation project here, which is for my working web shop already. So you see all the objects in here are for the working web shop. Okay. So now I can just make a new test case, say it's my generate test case, and actually just insert the code that BrightSQAI has generated for me, right? So I put it here. I have all the information in here, which is already mapped to my project. If I go and look in the manual view, I see that Catalan Studio just recognizes the script as if I would make it myself. So let me see if this runs. Let's go. I'm gonna use Chrome. Oh, it's going to start up. Yep, go. Browser is opening right here. I'm not doing anything, hands up here. So it's basically an automated test. So you can do end-to-end testing by using BrightSQAI. Yeah? So again, you can have your Azure DevOps connected. Every time when a work item or a requirement gets stacked or updated, for example, you can then let it generate those test cases in any test management tool that has an API to send test cases to, right? So that can be Test Monitor, that can be TestRail, that can be Azure Test Plans, and a whole lot of other test management tools that are out there in the market. For the record, we connect to 6,000 something different apps. That's a lot. We have a lot of app connections out of the box on the BrightSQAI platform. Yeah. And you might be wondering, like, okay, but Dean, what if my context just isn't good enough? For example, what if I have user stories and requirements that are very, very poorly described? Well, the system is very, very smart. You know, in the beginning, I showed you the slide that we connect on multiple language learning models. For every provider that you saw there, which are 3, we connect to 6 models of each of them. So there are 18 models that we can purpose to do really, really smart work that humans could do only better and faster. So to give you to give you maybe some sense of what the system can do and how little information it needs to perform. Let me just do those again. Start from scratch again. Oh, as well. So there's nothing in here for now. And let me show you something about how good the system actually works. I'm going to create a new work item, Azure DevOps, and I'm going to call it testing my bananas and say I want bananas not to be used, so I need tests not to identify and healthy bananas. For example, I'm just making this up on the spot. Okay, so I have that now. Trigger that change, save it. Yeah, and there we go again. So now I have triggered BrightSQAI, the AI platform. So let's go back here and see what it says. Should have received the trigger. Can take out. There we go. Here it's going for my bananas, right? It's gonna go completely bananas. So if we wait a while, it will process that tiny part of information and then look into its own knowledge store to see what it knows about bananas. And I guarantee you it will generate me test cases about bananas. It will even try to automate the test cases about the bananas, right? Let me go here. It's playing out. Yep. I go back to test monitor. Here we go. Check bananas for firmness. They can't be too soft, right? Gives you the instructions on how to do that, preconditions and expected result. Yeah. Test data, a variety of ripe and unripe bananas of different ages and sizes. Validate weight is within expected range. Yeah. Confirms that bananas don't have visible pests. That are things that I didn't know. So this also means that if you are using BrightSQAI in your business and your business is pretty unique, that it can gain knowledge about your business pretty quickly and actually provide you with test cases that match the type of business you're in no time with a limited amount of training and a limited amount of information, right? The system is just that good. And also when I go and look at it here, I'm very convinced that it's also generating tests about the bananas here. Let me see. Verify the bananas detach easily. It will make automated scripts, but it basically says here, I can't make automated scripts for bananas because it's a real life action. It is even that smart that it just tells you like, hey mate, I could have mocked you a script, but I didn't. I didn't make you a script because this is not possible to automate Catalan Studio. So it literally tells me that what I want to do is not possible. That is just how good the system actually is. Yeah. Um, yeah. So let me just go ahead and recap that for you. So we started out with the chat, which you can use as a very smart testing assistant, which you can interact with, and you can make your own BrightSQAI instance smarter because everything you tell it here, it stores it for context. Yeah. And if I want to be really, really lazy or maximize the amount of time I can spend on actual test execution and validation, I don't need to spend much time in this chat with those quick buttons if I don't want to. I can just have a virtual test engineer that is programmed to do a fixed set of tasks every time there is a valuable trigger or a valid trigger for the system start using that information, run it through the AI system, give you the detailed test cases, the automated tests, and the test data in no time. Yeah. So my job as a tester is now changed completely by the means of AI because I now have more time on my hands to do exploratory testing. I can verify these test cases. I can immediately execute. I can focus on my test management. I can focus on actually cleaning up the automated test scripts, not thinking them out because I have test scripts here that are generated by my AI that actually do work, right? So I am going from a more administrative and maintenance focus to a value-driven actual validation and test execution focus so I can catch more problems before they production. So let's go back to the slides. If you take a look then at the virtual test engine, they can help you with test case creation, update, and automation. Yeah. And they can do that on a lot of different softwares. You saw a demo with Azure DevOps, but it can do that with Jira Software Cloud. It can do it with TestVail instead of Test Monitor. You can use other automation tools. You can basically build your own virtual testing workforce that is 24/7 available, a workforce that is never sick, always accurate, and does not want to stop learning. So I think it's clear that what you saw today is not ChatGPT. It's actually entirely the opposite. It's not just a chat where you then have to go along and copy paste stuff out of that. No, you can really interact with the chat and use the smart buttons to contextualize what you need, orchestrate virtual test engineers, and then deploy it everywhere. Yeah, it's pre-trained on prepackaged software, like for example, as a Salesforce IFS, and we can train it to your additional context. So if you're building a specific application in-house, we can train it to that context as well. So you can deploy those versatile test engineers, really orchestrate them and connect them to your favorite testing apps. So what you have here is actually a smart AI platform that is made by testers for testers, that is trained on specific software testing contexts like ISTQB, behavior development. It's powered by multiple language learning models so that it's always suitable for the job. And we have built-in security privacy by default. Now, what do we actually mean by that? We mean by that your data always belongs to you, okay? We do not train on your data, right? We work together with our test engineers to actually do knowledge embedding in BrightSQAI, but we don't train on your data. You own the input and the output out of BrightSQAI. Every form of data, be it in rest or in movement, is encrypted with the latest standards. We are GDPR compliant. We have data processing agreements. We are a European-based company, so we adhere to that. And best of all, you can set your own data retention. Yeah, you can set data retention in between 7 or 69 days. And of course, we do frequent security testing on our own infrastructure. That is more security than you get as when you try to go to more open AI providers to build this by yourself, because you need to think about that. You can just use BrightSQAI to enhance you and speed up your testing activities. A good thing to note, say that if you're still concerned about the data you're putting in to BrightSQAI, do to de-identify and synthesize that data before we have you put it in BrightSQAI, right? So Tonic is the modern data platform for software testers and developers, which easily de-identifies your data, then synthesizes it, and you can push it back to any testing database. We did a Brownbag session about that a while ago. You can either use the QR code and scan it to go directly to the Brownbag, or you can just use the link in the comment section to rewatch that Brownbag. It was a really interesting one, and this is typically a step that goes before us implementing BrightSQAI in our environment, so that we do not process any sensitive data, and if we do, that is just completely not recognizable data at that point in time, which makes sense for complete data control, security, and privacy. Speaking about implementing BrightSQAI in your environment, say that you like what you saw today and you want to your environment. We actually work in a two-step model. So the first thing we do is approve of value, where we'll activate a trial license for you, meaning that we can have some of our people come in, set up BrightSQAI for you, and work on 2 to 5 use cases that would be valuable for you and the company. Yeah. So we will train BrightSQAI with your favorite prompts. We will set up some virtual test engineers to prove our point, and that's a duration that takes 3 to 6 weeks on a fixed budget, right? If the proof of value was successful, meaning that we were able to set up a valuable AI assistant or AI platform for your testing team, then all you still have to do is choose your pricing plan and scale your account if you want to continue to use it. Now, how do these pricing plans look like? We call it automation plans. We basically have a three-tiered pricing structure, which is the basic, enhanced, and hyper plan. Um, each and every one of the plans has the chat functions, and you have basically an unlimited amount of users that can use the chat. And then you pay for the amount of virtual test engineers that are programmed and the amount of applications you have connected to the platform. So, for example, the first demo, we had Test Monitor and Postgres. database. That would be 2 connected apps, and if we had one automated virtual test engineer that would work on that, you would end up in the basic plan. Yeah. The second demo, for example, had three connected apps and one virtual test engineer. Either way, because it was 3 connected apps, meaning Test Monitor, Azure DevOps. Let me think about what was the last one. Test Monitor, Azure DevOps. Oh yeah, and Catalan Studio, the automation tool. You will need 3 connected apps. Then you need enhanced plan, and that's how you count towards what you need. Yeah. If you need anything beyond these 3 tiers, you can just come and talk to us. You can contact our sales teams and we make you a custom offer, particularly if you are a larger organization and you want to connect more applications to BrightSQAI, we will have to make you a custom code. Either way, the guarantees that we make is that even when you use the basic plan, your testers will have up to 50% time savings by just using the basic plan. That's something that we see in the reality. By just using one virtual test engineer that works around the clock on 2 connected apps, you're already saving about 50% of your manual repetitive tasks. Yeah? So that means that you can use your real people to focus on more important things, just writing out test cases for them. Now, in terms of features, yeah, the capabilities are also tiered, of course. Yeah? So everybody has a conversational AI. In the basic plan, your virtual test engineer will do test case generation, requirements analysis, and test case optimization. If you want to do automation, a script automation, test automation, so then you will need this plan and beyond that. So that's a bit how our pricing structure works. Yeah. But again, this is very transparent what the pricing plan looks like. All plans they do include pre-trained context. So if you have an SAP HANA, for example, that context is already in BrightSQAI, so you have that for free. But if you're making a custom application in-house and we need to train BrightSQAI on your custom application, that is not included in the price because it will take some time from one of our engineers to actually train BrightSQAI to your application. So just putting that out there so you know that. Yeah. But the results are also there. For example, in a Dynamics 365 migration, we avoided adding extra people to the project and we were able to do test generation within a medical context in 3 weeks instead of the planned 3 months without upstaffing the test team. So that was very, very cost effective for that client. And we did the same for a larger client in air compressors for the SAP updates they had. So every now once in a while, a major SAP update got rolled out and they had their full team who was actually testing that by hand based on the new updated requirements and everything was there. So we use BrightSQAI to actually index that information and generate self-healing automated tests for key users who tested manually before. So we not only took that work out of their hands, they didn't manually anymore, but also reduced the testing times from actually 10 days to 10 minutes of automated tests that would run instead via BrightSQAI. So that's to give you a bit an idea about the results we can achieve, and that maybe gets you thinking about what use cases. And if you still need some more inspiration, we connect to 6,000 plus applications, but here are some of the most important that we connect with. So if there's anything on there that you're using, you can already be sure that we can connect BrightSQAI to that out of the box and help you become a more intelligent AI-driven testing workforce. So yeah, with that said, I would like to thank you guys for your attention and time. And this also means that now it's time for questions. Thank you. Okay, so there are a lot of questions here. I'm going to summarize most of them. So questions from Crystal. First of all, being if I'm using an Azure DevOps integration, what if I have external documentation and requirements that are described in user stories? So if you have you're probably referring to information that is not indexed in Azure DevOps, but is referred to, then we need to add the place where that additional information is stored as an extra, what we call data store to BrightSQAI, so that it can cross-reference all information you have. So for example, if you're using Azure DevOps in conjunction with a Microsoft SharePoint, that would just be an extra connected app so that we can cross-check all the information and context that is in there so that BrightSQAI has all parameters needed to generate the test cases. So question number 2, when the chat suggests the test cases, can you ask it to rewrite and update them before going into the test management app? Short answer to that is yes, you can. You can interact with the chat as if it were a person. So you can literally ask the chat saying that I don't like the results you're putting out. I want you to change it in this way or that way because that's how we do it. Then the chat will do it. And from then on, it will know that that is the way you would like your test cases. So question number 3, when code is generated for Selenium, is it possible to map it with the test you already have? Yes, it is. We can add your automation code base to BrightSQAI as a data store as well, so that it can basically read out the automation code and see which tests you already have, and basically append to those or update your existing tests in the format you need, even placing to-do comments in your code. If, for example, there is a page object that you do not have yet, it will put a to-do there for you that you will need to create a page object, but other than that, it will just generate and adapt the code. Will this, question number 4, there's a lot of question here. Will this also work for new websites, functionalities, and not only Shopify based? Is the system learning from previous input? The short answer is it works for any type of application. There's either more or less training involved based on what we already know. So if you're using Microsoft Dynamics, for example, we have a lot of context on that topic because we have indexed all Microsoft learning paths. If you're building your own custom web application on Microsoft Dynamics, for example, we need to pre-train it for your custom application as well, based on your context before you can implement it end-to-end. Question number 5, AI versus security, since it is also learning all information from the company and the user stories. And then I have 3 dots and a question mark. No, so in terms of security, the best way to process sensitive data is to not process sensitive data at all, right? So we try to focus there on actually really de-identifying and scrambling most of the data before we put it in BrightSQAI, but in a way that it doesn't lose its business integrity, so that it's still true to your business. Yeah. Next to that, as I also previously said, we don't actually train the core BrightSQAI engine on your data, and we also make sure that the partners we have and that we connect to, that they don't train on your data as well, and that they adhere to the same data retention that we put in the system. So then I see a comment from 𝗕𝘏𝘐. It's clear that the inputs, the context you give, the better the outcome. Is it possible to import the code itself? I think I already answered that. Yes, it is. It's not about a website. It's a complex. Yes, you can input the code itself as a data and knowledge store, and then BrightSQAI can use that to basically build upon as context, maybe alter the code if that's what you need. It can do that, so it can read through those millions of lines of code just a bit faster than a human can. Where can we find the list of test automation tools that can be used? I will make sure that we upload this list when we upload this video right after this Brownbag. But I'll make sure that list is uploaded together with that. Then I have, Nick, you gave feedback. Peter, what is there in new requirements? Bananas need to be green. Yeah. I just did the bananas on the spot, so I'm not going to answer that. It was just an idea that popped up that we should do a banana test. What cloud service is used for BrightSQAI? BrightSQAI is built on the Zapier middleware platform, which is hosted on AWS, but it doesn't have to stay there.
Sorry, Dean, I think you jumped over my question for bananas real quickly. It's not about the bananas, it's just about what if the requirement change, what happens to the old test cases?
Oh yeah, it will just go and index them. So it's connected up to Test Monitor. It will read out your old test cases, and it will see if I have an extra requirement or I have a requirement change. It will go along and adapt the test cases and store different versions of them as a draft. So you have, as a tester, have the end responsibility in basically telling the system which of the test cases it have. It's good. Like if you have one about the bruised bananas already, and then you add an additional parameter connected to the color, then it will, for example, update the test case and store a new version as a draft and assign it to you so that you can then review it and approve it. So it will not only create new test cases if it's necessary, it will also update existing ones. Does that answer your question, Peter?
It kind of answers my question, but I think I need to see what happens if it updates the right test cases. But as you mentioned, we get tagged, so
yeah, it will just put it back as a draft and assign it to you for review. The cloud services. So as I said, it's all basically set on AWS, but it doesn't have to stay there. For example, if you are really concerned about privacy and you have your own private cloud at your company, we can offer a containerized version of a service that's pre-trained for your context, right in your own private cloud, so that your data stays in your own private cloud. Manta said, how well is the coverage? How did you assess this accuracy and precision? Well, that is something that we can set in the pre-configuration. So for example, if you have a set of testers that is really familiar with the application that they have to test, that would mean that they don't need very in-depth tests to go along that. So we can set the depth level of the tests pre-configured, so they can either be really in-depth or they can either be very much high level. It depends on the environment we set it in. How do we assess the accuracy and the precision? That is basically based on user feedback. So in the beginning, when we train it to a customer context, we interact with it a lot via the chat. And in the chat, we have thumbs up and thumbs down for responses. And for every thumbs up we give it, it remembers that that is good work that it does. And if we give it a thumbs down and then we say how to adapt it, so it will adapt it. But the core already has a number of fail-safe mechanisms to make sure that the tests are really accurate according to the documentation, and that only value-added scenarios are being added out of memory. Also from Manta, the created code, is it easily maintainable? Are objects and code reused? Yes, if we add your code base as a data store in BrightSQAI, then it can basically read that out and reuse what is in there, and also generate scripts that are built in the same architecture than you have built your own code base. If you don't add your code base as a knowledge store, it will work on some more general rules, but also those rules are tweakable. So for example, we can add the 12 rules to make code suck less from Venkat. We can basically take those 12 rules, add it to BrightSQAI, and then it will adhere to all of those 12 rules for clean code when generating code. So it's really modular actually to set up and train. Then I see Pat Talemans, you mentioned training on specific ERP, CRMs, etc. Is there also already out-of-the-box training on specific domains of industries like banking sector, or is it only trained when setting up for a specific customer in a certain industry? We did it on application category for now. And when we enter an environment at a client site, we specifically train it for them in a separate environment for now. But towards the future, we have the sector-based plan basically on a roadmap to make sure that we have some sector-specific templates. So for example, if we already did a few banking customers, and then we would do a new one, that the pre-training would be less intensive because it already has the sector knowledge, for example. So we're working on that, but that's not how it works today. I see a question from Gerlinde. How do you train? Yeah, how do you train the system? How do you train the system on a system which you develop yourself? Yeah, then you basically need access to all user requirements, user manuals, source code of the system, mockups, everything there is that can provide information, even meeting notes that we have to index in BrightSQAI so that it gets trained to your custom system. Going back, that's a reply from Nick. I think you already just said what I said. Okay, that's the list. And then I am back on my end. Okay, I see another question from Mante here down below. So this focuses a lot on manual tests and UI tests. What about other level integration and unit testing? The short answer there is that it can basically handle any test level. We've seen it generating unit tests, which is based on code that was already there, but that's of course not not really a best practice, but it can also generate unit tests first based on the requirements that it has, for example, in Azure DevOps. So you can start coding against your unit test and then push the code and write further automated API and UI tests. So it works on every test level. Then a question from 𝘕𝗿𝘐. Do you have a document ready for risk and security validation to prevent we have to ask the same questions that our risk and security departments will ask anyhow? We have a few guidelines for that. It's on our frequently asked questions list, so we have a few of those security recommendation and questions that we get asked a lot, so that we have the answers. So, oh, and I see that 𝘕𝗿𝘐 is no longer in the call. Yeah, this is being recorded anyway. So then I have a question from 𝘕𝗿𝘐𝘗𝗏. What is the quality of the answers with other LLMs than OpenAI? The question of the quality of the answers on our side is determined by a combination of all AI services we connect to. So we basically ask the same question to multiple AI services at the same time, and then we combine those answers into a really good answer based on our own quality parameters, which are being uploaded by the people at BrightTest in the way we see software testing. So for example, we have a few criteria that determine what a good test case is for us at BrightTest. We make sure that all the answers then are cross-checked and adhere to that criteria. And then we make sure that it generates one qualitative answer that adheres to these criteria to keep the quality of the test cases as high as possible. So we don't actually compare the language learning models with each other. We use them in conjunction to each other, in combination with some clear quality requirements from our side to make sure that the feedback that returns to the end user is very qualitative. And then I see no questions anymore. Are there any other people who have any questions about this topic? I'm happy to answer those.
Yes, Dean, indeed. I still have a question. Namely, we've mainly been talking about testing and QA. Now, is it also possible to generate development code based on user stories? So, for example, in Java or C#, any language?
Yeah, we did some internal tests with that, and it's perfectly possible. But the only thing that of course, it needs the requirements and any additional documentation to know what would be expected, right? But on the other hand, you also need a clear definition of the type of architecture you want, meaning written out or mocked out in visuals, what kind of architecture you would like. including some best practices of your own environment. And with that, it can generate quite qualitative code, including unit tests that you can then actually use as an application when you build the code. But the yeah, it's not really a problem, more of an inconvenience. BrightSQAI doesn't have this like local development environment, so it can't actually rerun that code for you to make sure that it runs. So what we saw in reality when we import that code in our own local development environment, that sometimes that if we have for that BrightSQAI thinks that we have a certain setup locally, that we then noticed that we actually didn't have, so the code didn't run. So then we needed to add that to the context of BrightSQAI so that it knows what our own setup is. So it becomes a matter of describing very clearly what you like to do and what the rules of your game are, so to say. And then BrightSQAI can actually generate output based on the rules of your game that are actually very qualitative and you can work with.
Yeah. Okay. And suppose my company is using a low-code development platform, for example, OutSystems. Would it be easier in that case to generate code?
Our experience says no. Why? For example, we also try to use it in conjunction with 𝘕𝗿𝘀, but that is almost completely a no-code automation tool. The issue there is that we don't have access to what the actual source code looks like. So, for example, if you have a test scenario that you can create drag and drop in 𝘕𝗿𝘀, we have no access to what the actual file in the backend looks like once a user has created a 𝘕𝗿𝘀 test, meaning that it is a black box for us and also for BrightSQAI. The only thing it can do is describe the actions that you need to take, for example, in OutSystems to do your development work. But if it can't access what the actual code behind it looks like, it's nearly impossible to generate it.
Yeah, okay, I understand.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, so sorry to disappoint you there, but that's a hurdle where we want to get over. I think that these landscapes will either introduce their own AI solutions for generating features, basically, or that they have to open up their box, basically, which I doubt they will do because that's their intellectual property. So I think there you're still in for a little wait until they implement AI in their own tools, I guess.
Yeah. All right, thanks.
Are there any additional questions? Okay, I hear silence. Maybe good for you guys to know. If you follow the Bright Academy on LinkedIn, we will post our 2024 Brownbag calendar very soon, which means that we are going to do future events as well as we did last year. And yeah, for now, I'd like to thank you all for being here. And if you haven't eaten yet, I wish you a very tasteful and happy lunch and a nice day. Thanks, everybody.